We don't have closed captioning capabilities, do we?
We have not engaged them now.
Okay.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our November Black Jewish Dialogue for the year 2021. We've had several months off over the summer and beginning of fall, but we're excited to be back to welcome you and to have our special guest today to be talking about the topic of Black and Jewish. If you don't know me, if this is your first time coming, or if you don't remember, I'm Rabbi Craig Lewis from Mitzvah Congregation. It's been my privilege to help to moderate these meetings and to work with Deborah Levine to make them happen. And we wish Deborah a speedy recovery and look forward to having her back very soon, helping to bring these important meetings together. We're going to have two presenters today. The first, we'll hear from Dr. Barbara Weitz, and Barbara is the former director of film studies of the Film Studies Certificate Program at Florida International University in their English department. She's done research for many years with Dr. Tutu Parfit and with the Kulanu organization, identifying and supporting isolated, emerging, and returning Jewish communities around the world. She's also been on the steering committee of the Faith Communities Organizing for Sanctuary, and has spent time at our southern border trying to assist migrants seeking asylum in the US. She is currently heading up the organizing group preparing to help refugee Afghanis settle in the community. Through her research with Jews of color, she's spoken at many conferences and given webinars on this growing topic. And in her spare time, she comes and does presentations such as this with our group. Our second speaker will be Bryant Henselman, who not only a personal friend, a longtime friend of the Mitzvah Congregation. And Bryant, we wish you a belated Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day, and thank you for your service. Bryant is a veteran of the US Army, a graduate of the Military Intelligence Cryptologic College of Corey Station, Pensacola. After a particularly difficult deployment to Iraq, he shifted his focus from intelligence analysis to Jewish community building, interfaith outreach, and inclusion activities. Bryant is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant working primarily with North American Jewish organizations, a Jewish educator, teen engagement mentor, a 2018 Union for Reform Judaism Juvenile Fellow, and a bluegrass hobbyist. Bryant is currently studying the intersections, conflicts, and alliances of the Black and Jewish diasporas at Western Washington University. And parenthetically, it says, in preparation for rabbinic school, so he's gunning for my job. And he currently resides in Bellingham, Washington, and has also been a guest teacher at Torah study at Mitzvah Congregation and a speaker at other Mitzvah events. So we welcome you back, Bryant. We welcome you, Barbara. And we're going to go in, alphabetical order by first name. We're going to start with Barbara. And I believe you have a PowerPoint presentation as well. And without any further ado, Barbara, I'm just going to go ahead and put the spotlight on you, and we'll let you begin. Barbara, I think you're muted. Let me unmute you, or you can unmute yourself.
I did, yes.
Okay, good.
Okay. Am I there?
Yes.
Okay, all right. In full disclosure, I am in Asheville, North Carolina, close, but not that close. But my connection is varied and it comes closer than others may think. If you know Deborah Levine, she's my cousin. So I have known Deborah for 70 years. Now I just said how old we are. But anyway, so with that said, I'd like to begin by sharing my screen. Okay. All right. Are we able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's an increasingly important topic. And many of us, meaning all peoples everywhere, are not really cognizant of the fact that certainly 12 to 15% of Jews in America are Jews of color. Not everyone is a Black Jew. There are some Latin Jews. There are a lot. I mean, if you go to New Mexico, you'll see a lot of them. But we're going to be talking about the rising number of Black Jews that there are now in America or in the United States and growing every day. So all right, it was actually, what was it, about 3 years ago, I lose time because of COVID, that there was this debate because the Israeli actress Gal Gadot, who played, I think, Superwoman or something, some journalist had said she was not white. And you look at her, of course, she seems totally white, very Israeli white. But this question started to arise and people started to talk about it much more. The fact that certainly in America, the Jewish identity here is of the Ashkenazi Jew, except in places like New Mexico, where it's Sephardi. But what we need to pay attention to is the fact that white American Jews have not actually bought into, but have been granted power and privilege because they're white. And what this has done over the years has been to exclude any Jews of color, particularly Black Jews of color, and kind of push them to the margins of society. And it's really interesting, just this little aside, I became interested in this about 15 years ago. I was living in Miami at the time, and there was an article in the sports section of the Miami Herald about a basketball player, a Black basketball player for the University of Miami Hurricanes, who would not play a game on Saturday, like Sandy Koufax. But everybody was just amazed at the fact that he was a young Jewish man, had been born Jewish, his parents were Jewish. His grandparents were Jewish. So we're not talking about converted Jews or people who have chosen to be Jews. We're talking about people who have been Jews for a very, very long time. In fact, longer than I've been here, or longer than my family has been here. But I think it's very important to understand that we see a lot about how American Jews tend to be more liberal. They tend to be on the battle lines. I know I was at one of the George Floyd demonstrations in downtown Asheville. But it's often seen as a paternalistic type of relationship where the white Jews are siding with Blacks, whether they be Jewish or not, to help them help them become like us. And it's a very frightening thought, especially when you realize that there is such a large number and growing of Black Jews. Okay, I chose this first one. On the left, it's kind of cut off a little bit, but it was from a brochure talking about how Jews come in all colors. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and show you a little bit more also. In the middle, I've shown, this is from the 2020 census. And it's talking about ethnicity. Not, everybody confuses, is there such a thing as race? No, there's not. But they're talking about the ethnicity of those living in the United States. And they do have Black or African American, but nowhere is it listed that there might be Jews. There might be African American Jews in the mix. And then I'm just going fast, but I'll be talking more about this. On the right side, of course, you see a very famous poster that was in all the subways in New York City. And it reads, "You don't have to be white to be Jewish." For real. And people, it was basically an ad for, I think it was rye bread, Jewish rye bread, but it's very, very poignant. And I tried to get in touch with the people who had made the ad to see if they really knew or really find out what the intent was behind this particular ad, because it is so perfect for our discussion today. All right. Again, just a simple question. Why do synagogues usually look like this in the US on the left-hand side and not this on the right-hand side? And it is a question, and it's a question especially for white American Jews. Why is there not more of a reaching out to Jews of color, particularly in this case, Black Jews, to be part of our congregations? And it's not a very common thing. And you can see that on the left is the board of directors. Okay, obviously not one person who is not probably an Ashkenazi Jew, but certainly a white Jew. Okay. This one, I wanted to give you the idea that, and I talked about this with Bryant, and he agreed. He said that's what does happen. A Jew of color or Black Jew walks into a new synagogue. Either people turn around and look at him during the service, or at the Oneg Shabbat, which comes after the service, like a reception, people come up to that person and the questions are always the same. Are you Jewish? Why are you here? How, when, where did you become Jewish? They would never ask these questions of a white Jew standing right next to the Black Jew. And it's really important to understand that this is within us. It's within American society. And it's something that will be changing. And I hope will be changing sooner rather than later. One thing I did want to say is Rabbi Lewis asked me, why are you making this presentation? And I told him really it was more to make people aware that there are many Black Jews out there and they need to be brought into the fold. And they need, all Blacks do need to be brought into the American fold, but Black Jews need to be brought into the Jewish American fold. Okay. All right. I'm going to start with going way, way back. Where did Black Jews come from? Well, we're not going to talk about through conversion or mixed marriage. We'll talk about that afterwards. But there were Black Jews at least 2,000 years ago, possibly more. Some people have now said that they were after the destruction of the Second Temple in the 5th century, in the 6th century BCE, Jews started to leave Jerusalem and wander in all directions. And many of them, and I'll be showing more of this in the next slide, but many of them either crossed the Nile into Egypt and went south, or came south and into Yemen, because there were many Yemenite Jews, we know, and then crossed a small body of water into Ethiopia. And then from Ethiopia, moved south. We know now that there were Black Jews in Africa from this time, and they have not changed. They have not left Judaism. Many of them have, but now, again, I've done a lot of work in this through Kulanu, but we're trying to bring these people back into the fold because they were Jewish, and they do, now that there is genetic testing, and many of them have asked to be tested, we have found a Jewish sequence of genes in American Jews, Jews all over the world, as well as African people. And in fact, I was working very closely with Tudor Parfit, who we talked about before. He's considered the Jewish Indiana Jones. He was the one who discovered the Lemba tribe, which you can see on the bottom right, which has always lived in southern Zimbabwe, northern South Africa. And he started talking to them. English is their language, so unfortunate colonialism. But many of them were describing the customs that they had. And even the ones that didn't know about the word Jewish or Judaism started explaining about the different rituals, the different customs, the way they prepared the meat, the fact that they didn't eat pork. It went on and on. And then when Dr. Parfit and others did genetic testing on them, they found with over 60% of them had the Jewish genetic sequence. And in addition, about 53% carried the gene for the Kohanim, which is the priestly class of Jews. So it was a surprise. And this happened about 25 years ago. Now, as they look back, and certainly as the Jews of Ethiopia have become much more prominent in the news because so many of them were able to be rescued by Israel. However, not all. And with what's going on in Ethiopia today, there is talk of Israel again trying to go in and rescuing the Jews that remain there. But there were a huge number of Ethiopian Jews. And now, as we go back and look at some of the written research that we have, there are mentions of African Jews, and here Ethiopian Jews in particular. This was a traveler from the 1600s makes mention of the Jews in Ethiopia, and it was spoken of as a normal thing. They were not, this was not unusual. And if you talk to Ethiopian Jews, they will tell you, of course. And they all claim lineage back to the Queen of Sheba, which, as we know, was many thousands of years ago. And therefore, they feel that through that connection, they are part of the Davidic monarchy of Israel, that they see their descendants as being descended from the house of David. And I just included a poem that was written in the 1400s talking about the Queen of Sheba. And everybody knows, you open the Bible, it's in the Bible, of course. And this is where we go. But I want you to take a look at now what we do know is that there were African Jews in virtually all parts of Africa. The most common route was straight down from Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, straight down the East Coast. However, there were many Jews who branched off from that. And there are Jews, we are still learning about them. There are many who claim to be Jews, like the Igbo in Nigeria, yet genetically we now know they're not, they don't have the genetic sequence, but many others do. And this is what we want to remember. And the important thing is also that Jews not only went south, a lot of them at the time, especially at the time of the destruction of the temple, boarded ships up here near Haifa, what is today Haifa. And the ships were mainly owned by Phoenicians, because the Phoenicians were the maritime traders of the time. And they moved through trading with what we today call North Africa, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, which also borders the Atlantic Ocean. And what has also been discovered in this time is that the Jews who live, or the people who live in the Sahara Desert called Berbers, there's a substantial number of them who carry the Jewish genetic sequence. And I know personally, I took a Jewish tour of Morocco, and we were in the middle of the Sahara, and we went into this tiny walled-in village. That was not part of the Jewish tour. That was a regular tour. But we walked into this walled-in town in the middle of the Sahara and got in about a block, and there was a Jewish synagogue. And it had been there for people didn't know. It's always been here, you know. So it's not as unusual as we think it is. However, what happened is, okay, there were many Jews all over Africa. How did they get to the United States? Well, the most probable answer, of course, was the slave trade. Okay. And once they were captured by the slavers, many of whom were Jewish, not many, a few of whom were Jewish, by the way, they lost their identity, you know, obviously, and they were brought to the United States as a slave with no religion. But these are the ones that we're going to be talking about also. Everybody thinks, well, if you're Black and you're Jewish, you probably became Jewish because you were owned by a Jewish slave owner. Actually, and you can tell this to people, Jews only accounted for 1.25% of all Southern slave owners. And there were a lot more Black Jews than this. Okay, so we're going to look at how. Of course, as you know, there were Jews in the North and the South. We're in the South, so we know that many of them came in through Charleston and Savannah and spread to Chattanooga, Asheville, etc. And the ones who did become slave owners, this man in particular, his name is Judah Benjamin, and he was very high up in the Confederacy during the Civil War, and was one of Jefferson Davis's advisors. And yes, he owned slaves. Some did, some didn't. Okay, the first photo we have of Jews in America, comes from the 1850s. Remember, photographs or photography really was only came into being in the 1830s. So we don't have much before that time that we could say, you know, photographic evidence. But we do have a photograph of this man. His name was Billy Simon. It was changed to Simmons when he was brought to the Americas as a slave. Okay. However, he was bought by a Jewish slave owner and then freed. And he became the first admitted Black member of a white shul in Charleston, South Carolina. He was a scholar in both Hebrew and Arabic. He became very, very important in the understanding of, at that time, that not all Jews were white. Okay. Other reasons that Blacks were Jewish or are Jewish now most Black Jews, Africans who came to America as slaves were forced to adopt the religion of their slave owner, which was 98 point something percent Christian. So the Christianizing of Africans who were slaves in America was seen as a charitable act, a civilizing act. And it was promoted or highly promoted by many religious slave owners. It seems like an oxymoron, doesn't it? But anyway, okay. When the enslaved Africans who came here and learned English, many of them were taught to read, which was by the benevolent slave owners of the time. But what did they read? The majority of times they read the Bible. And of course, the New Testament talks about the Christian Bible, and the Old Testament is the Jewish Bible. And they started reading the Old Testament and saw how many similarities there were between the Jews of that time in the various stories in the Old Testament and the African Americans who were enslaved or had just been freed. And many of them, this is the origin really of one of the origins of Black gospel music. Was people identifying with the Old Testament and identifying with the biblical Jews. And I gave you some of the lyrics. Okay. After the Civil War, we know that Blacks were emancipated. Doesn't always mean they were freed, but they were emancipated by law. And as they were emancipated, and some of them did actually become free and start to prosper in the American society, a lot of them did not want to identify with Christians. They saw Christianity as being their enslavers. And therefore, many of them also gravitated to Judaism this way. And
Barbara, can you maybe another minute or two? Because I also want to make sure we have Bryant.
Okay, I always talk too slow. Yes, thank you. All right. Basically, what I wanted to show you that Judaism and the Zionism, the back to, of course, Africa, but it was really to the Israel, to the promised land, began basically at the same time. And W.E.B. Du Bois, who was very prominent in the Back to Africa movement, and Theodore Herzl knew each other and corresponded. So there was this connection, certainly in America. I wanted to show you Harlem. During the Harlem Renaissance, the Jewish Harlem was the third largest Jewish population in the world after Warsaw and the Lower East Side. So there have been so many Jews that gravitated to Harlem, especially in the 1920s. Many of them, of course, had been enslaved and came to the north, like most people, the demographic shift. And many of them ended up in Harlem and saw the already established Jewish community. And Jews were, oh, I'm sorry. Jews, Jews were living among them, mainly white Jews, but not all. Okay. And these are just examples of the early Jews and the rabbis who came to America and started congregations here. Okay, I'm going to move on. There was a group that was founded in Chicago. They're now in great trouble. They moved to Israel, and Israel wants to kick them out, telling them they're not really Jews. That's another story. We're not going to talk about that today. But during the Harlem Renaissance and in the 1930s, especially, there were a huge number of Black Jews or Jews who became Black, and they were connected through music. And this was very common. So there have been some, this particular Willie the Lion Smith had grown up Jewish. He had grown up, he had been bar mitzvahed, and he was not only a piano teacher, he also put on shows. Okay. And many Jews or Blacks of the 1930s decided to use their musical abilities and became African American cantors. And this was quite common. I'm just going to show you a few of them. This man was known as Mendel, the Black cantor. Here's David Hakohen, who also was not even born in America. He says that he was born in Ethiopia, but he has, if all of this is true, he's been a cantor all over the world. Okay. Thomas LaRue, I don't have time to play you, unfortunately, his music. It's wonderful. He is very, very famous, as they put it here, king of the colored cantors. The first woman cantor was actually half African American, half white, and her name was Goldie Mae Steiner. She became very famous and put on concerts all over for, as well as being a cantor in the synagogue. I just want to show you how many. I couldn't even put them all in. There are at least 1 million Jews who identify as Black. Okay. And there are so many different organizations that are working to promote the establishment or the understanding of Black Jews. Okay. Of course, there are many Black American Jewish congregations, many of them because they didn't feel accepted in white Jewish congregations. Okay. A very famous one is in Philadelphia, Congregation Temple Bethel. I had to put this one in. Amari Stoudemire, if any of you are sports fans, know that he was a basketball player. And now he is an Israeli scholar. So he tells everyone that his mother said he was Jewish. His roots were Jewish, who knows? In any case, he moved to Israel. He became a Jewish citizen. He studied at a yeshiva. And That's him. Learn more about him. Again, the many Jews, Black rabbis and Black, like in the right-hand corner, Joshua Nelson is an Orthodox Jew who does kosher gospel singing. Okay, all over the.
Barbara, I saw a hand go.
Pardon?
And
Can I just really run through these quick? Okay, I'm going to run through these.
Yes, and then we'll have time for some questions at the end. But if you can just go real quickly,
Okay.
and then we'll let Brian have his presentation.
And there's Brian, who we're going to hear from in a minute. Among the young Jews of color that are working today, many Jews, Black Jews, are very famous, and we may have or may not have known they were Jewish. Many authors, many artists, many musicians. The young youth poet laureate in 2015 was a young Jewish woman. Here you can see also the many people who we probably know who identify as Jews and are in every walk of life in the United States. And this is basically my ending. Black American Jews were either born into Judaism, and this is occurring more and more and more, because as the younger generation becomes the older generation and has children, these children will be born into a Jewish home, and it goes on and on. Many of them are reclaiming their Jewish heritage from Africa that we spoke of before. There are a number who have been of Black babies who have been adopted by Jewish couples and have been raised Jewish or Jewish. Okay. There are many interracial marriages of many of the people that I showed you, and I didn't even show you most of them. And then there are, of course, the Jews who choose to be Jewish, who like the idea of being Jewish and study being Jewish and become Jewish. And I just like to leave you with this, because this rabbi, I know her, she is the rabbi of a congregation just east of Winston-Salem. And what she said is, to me, worth repeating. The lesson of Black Jews in America is that we are part of both worlds and full members of each. We are not the internally torn souls of so many tragic mulatto movie characters, forever at conflict with ourselves, but we do feel the joy and pain, the love and hurt that defines Blackness and Jewishness in America. And though we do have the answers to, can't we all get along here, or we don't have the answers? Who does? Jews as African Americans, we certainly understand the question. Okay. And with that, I will turn it over to
Thank
Rabbi
you.
Lewis. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you for that amazing history lesson and just their current culture. There is a request, a couple requests we've had come in the chat, if we can distribute these slides. And that these are your slides, so I don't know if you want to have them distributed,
yes,
or if we can.
I could do that. I could probably transfer them up to PDF and then send it to people. So
okay, and if I send it to Deborah, maybe Deborah would post them on the American Diversity Report.
That's fine.
If you're okay with that. And Deborah is with us. I saw. We'll go ahead and thank you so much and talk about your experiences. Let me spotlight you. There we go. Okay. And you
All
should be able
right,
to
well,
unmute yourself.
okay. Am I unmuted? Can everyone see me? Can I get a nod or two? All right, awesome. Well, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Barbara, that was incredible information. Thank you for sharing that and giving some background information for us all. I was asked here to speak about my personal experience as a Jew of color. And so to do that, I'm going to tell a little bit about how I came to Judaism, which is completely braided through the history of Chattanooga for me personally. Going to talk about my interracial family. My family's also got lots of different religions going on, and then I'm going to talk about my work specifically in the Jewish community. So my mother is a proud Black woman from Birmingham, Alabama. She's raised as Southern Baptist as they come, and so I grew up in a household that was constantly speaking about God and knew about God. We sang His praises. My father is a white man from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was raised Catholic, but 2 or 3 generations ago, there's always been stories about Jews possibly being in the family. There was a store in Wisconsin that was attacked and burned down or something to that effect that belonged to the family because it was rumored to be owned by Jews. So there's always been these different connections going around in my family. But what I do know is that growing up, I never quite felt the same peace and connection to God that my mother and her family felt when they were in church. I was always in church and I could feel God present and I could see that God was physically moving in that space, but I personally couldn't feel what my family present was feeling. And so I always kind of grew up wondering, why can't I touch God in the same way that my family does? And kind of what I figured was I grew up in a mixed family. And so there were different languages being spoken in different cultures. And so I just kind of figured that I hadn't realized the translation of God that worked for me. I couldn't quite understand the language that God was speaking personally to me. I couldn't really talk about it in my family because my parents were raising a good Southern Christian boy, and I wasn't going to walk away from that in her household. But as I got older and started to understand more about myself and got to move all over the world because my parents were in the military and then I was in the military. So whenever I was exposed to something Jewish, something sparked in my soul, something made sense that didn't quite make sense in other spaces. To make a long story short, I spent about 8 years in the military, and I kept saying to myself, I am going to come to Judaism officially. I'm going to do an official conversion because I feel that in the future, I'm supposed to be working in the Jewish community in some capacity. I didn't necessarily know that I wanted to be a rabbi, but I knew that I had something to do in the community. I was deployed to Iraq about circa 2010, something like that, 2008 or 9, maybe, somewhere around there. And I was on this convoy ride headed to this teeny tiny little JSS, which is a small little base. I was going to be heading up a military intelligence cell. And on the way there, I remember saying to myself that my life is not where it's supposed to be. I'm not living the way that God has expected me to live in this world. I'm not performing the way that my family has expected me to perform. So if I make it back home alive, I promised God that I would return to Judaism. And obviously I made it back alive. I heard that the convoy that was dropping me off on their way back to the larger base where they were all stationed at, that convoy was hit by an IED, which is an exploding device for those that aren't familiar. And so I remember thinking to myself, I've been talking to God and promising forever that I'm going to come back to Judaism. And I was taught growing up in my wonderful Christian household that when God speaks to you, He will send confirmation. And so for me, it always felt that God was pulling me towards something a little different than what my mother was called towards. But I'd always been waiting for confirmation. And so to make that promise to God on that convoy, on that way to that tiny JSS, and then later on hear that convoy where I was actually sitting was hit by an IED was kind of the confirmation that I'd been waiting for. It was kind of the, I call it like a little bell told me when I was small. Like I kept hearing this little bell that I'm supposed to be doing something different. And I felt that Iraq was that resounding boom that caused that little bell to echo when I was younger. To move forward a little bit, I actually moved to Chattanooga to do my conversion process. There was, like I said, there was possibly some Jewish heritage, but I wanted to do it completely right from the start. So I did a full conversion. I did that right there in Chattanooga. And what I like to tell people as I've started to work in the Jewish community and I've kind of carved out a space for myself, People often ask me, how did I come to Judaism? And I kind of tell them that I've always been here. The rabbis of the Talmud and the Mishnah tell us, so those are rabbis with a capital R, they tell us that all souls were present at the giving of Torah. All Jewish souls were present right there at Mount Sinai when the Torah was handed down in fire. And we're supposed to transmit that Torah in fire ourselves, meaning that something so big happened on that mountain that everyone could not help but watch and could not help but feel what was taking place. And we're supposed to shine so brightly in our own lives with our Jewish spirit that people can't take their eyes off of us. Maya Angelou said that you should do everything you do, not worried about money, but do it amazingly so that people can't take their eyes off of you, and everything else should follow. So that's kind of how I felt about Judaism. I wanted to be amazing at what I was doing. I spent 7 years studying on my own before I came to Mitzvah congregation to study with Rabbi Tepper for about 2 years. And I got spoiled in Chattanooga. The wonderful thing about Chattanooga was that the Chabad, the conservative, and the Reform congregation, we all supported one another. And that's how I felt at Mitzvah. Like each of those congregations, there were representatives from each of those congregations who made sure that I felt welcomed and had a voice and could speak honestly and openly in my community. And I was spoiled because when I left Mitzvah, when I left the community that knew me fully and was used to me speaking my mind, sometimes too loudly and too longly at Torah study, Richard can attest to that. When I left that space and entered new Jewish spaces, I was entering spaces where people didn't know my name. They didn't recognize me. They didn't know my story. Things that started to happen that blew my mind is I would walk into a space, and this is before I had accolades behind my name and had worked with the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, which is where I do a lot of my consulting now. Before I had accolades before my name, and before my presence would be announced like via newsletter or spoken from the Bima, I would just be a young man walking into Torah study or walking into a synagogue. I never really thought much about the fact that I was a Black young man walking into these spaces. So there would be times when I was traveling across the country, learning in different Jewish communities, trying to decide what kind of rabbi I wanted to be myself. I would walk to the door and buzz the buzzer because a lot of our communities are naturally guarded. It's important that we protect our spaces. There's been a lot of crazy the last few years. I ring the buzzer to get in, and people will stare at me and not want to let me in. People would sometimes gather around the little microphone asking me questions, despite the fact that my head is covered, I'm wearing my yarmulke, I've got a tie, I'm carrying my talit bag. It's obvious what I'm there for, but the presence of a young man of color there to learn and partake of the community was too much for some people to take. Other times I'd be let in without a problem. It'd be fun, it'd be great, I'd enjoy the service, but I'd notice that I was getting all these stares, and it wasn't something that I'm not used to. I'm from a mixed race family. I spent a lot of my time in mainly white spaces, so I'm used to having the additional looks. I was not used to having that in my place of worship. Obviously, like I said, I was spoiled at mitzvah. People would walk up to me throughout services, or if I was walking around the synagogue, and hand me plates and ask me where they can put this for the Yodnet later on. They'd ask me questions about, is the speaker set up for the presentation they're giving later, thinking that I was someone that worked at the synagogue as opposed to someone who was worshiping at the synagogue. Later on, as I moved up in my career and started to speak at a lot of synagogues, I would no longer get the crazy questions or looks because people knew who I was, but people in the congregation at times would ask me questions such as, are you really Jewish? And this could happen right after I've been on the Bima chanting Torah portions, maybe giving the Devar Torah that day. Maybe I led Torah study earlier. Maybe they've already heard that I'm the youth engagement director of a temple out in Boulder, or they've read one of my publications for the URJ. Despite any of those things, after services, sometimes during services, people were too excited to wait. I'd get asked, are you Jewish? And then I'd get asked, how are you Jewish? And then I'd get asked, well, how do you know so much about Judaism if you weren't born into this life? And it seems a lot of times that no matter what answers I give, they were never enough. People still couldn't believe it, or I wasn't fully accepted unless they knew that I worked in the community or had certain connections. I think one of the most painful situations was I was asked to chant for High Holy Days once, and I'd gotten a vocal coach so that my chanting was on point. I grew up singing in the Baptist church, so y'all know that I can sing. That's just kind of how we do it. And so I was really proud of the Torah portion that I delivered. It was one of the proudest moments I'd ever had in Judaism. And then afterwards, 3 to 4 people actually asked me if I was really Jewish or if I had been hired to perform for the day. So when something like that happens, it completely removes me from the situation. I'm here to worship on the holiest day of our year. I'm here to partake just as everyone else is. And not only that, I've put in the time and the work, and I'm here to lead services, or I'm here to chant, or I work with the URJ. So it's painful to be asked those questions. It's also painful when I'm in my own synagogue, wherever that is, where I'm living in the States at that time. And the people who are not normally involved in the synagogue, meaning those who aren't there all the time, those who maybe only show up for high holy days, or when we're, working in the sukkah, like people that only show up for those very special events, and we're happy that you're there for those really special events. But then when you show up for those really special events, please don't target me and ask me my name and try to show me the correct page in the Siddur, or try to explain what's going on in the service, or speak Yiddish thinking that I don't understand and say something really cruel and disrespectful, because I grew up understanding German. So when people speak Yiddish, I understand that. So all these things to say this, I'm not saying that if the situation that I've gone through had been terrible enough, I wouldn't still be a member of the Jewish community. I'm here because of all the wonderful things that I've experienced in the Jewish community. I'm here because I know for a fact that I live and worship and work in a community that cares about Tikkun Olam, seeing the world repaired. I'm a part of a community that is working toward Gemilut Chasadim, which is acts of loving kindness. So I'm part of a community that has reached out in civil rights movements in the past and is doing the work right now. I walk into different synagogues and I do a lot of speaking, and I encounter a lot of trouble. Sometimes I encounter straight racism, but more times than not, and overwhelmingly, I'm embraced. People are excited that I'm there. They want to hear my stories. And the main reason why I stick around is because when I walk into spaces around the United States, and young Jews of color are in the congregation and they see me walk in, those young Jews of color, they stand up straighter, they sit up straighter, they can't take their eyes off of me. And I want them to watch me. I want them to see me chant from the Bima. I want them to see me teaching at Torah study. I want them to see me like leading programs in their youth engagement programming, because I want them to know that one day they can be a leader in the community. I didn't see any leaders in the Jewish community who looked like me growing up, but there are people in this generation who are. For example, in Boulder, those kids in Boulder, it's not unusual. They would never think it's unusual to see a Jew of color leading their community, because that's what I was to them. I think it's important that we just create the space and the time for other Jews of color to lead up front. And we need to understand that we're not all, Judaism is not monolithic, just like Black culture is not monolithic. We're not always going to agree on everything, but we can agree on repairing the world and acts of loving kindness. If we need to figure out how to work together to bridge those gaps, then that's what we need to do. But I think one of my main purposes, and this is kind of what I've learned over the last few years as I've gone back to school to prepare for rabbinical school, I feel like my purpose is to be proud in Black, just as proud as Black as I'm proud and Jewish. So when I walk into Jewish spaces, people are going to hear about how Black I am. If they can't already see that, they're going to hear that I'm rooted and I'm prepared to speak up for the Jewish community. And sometimes when I walk into the Black community to be around my Black family and friends and spend time in different spaces, people don't realize I'm Jewish, and things are said that I have to immediately correct and speak up for. I correct the Jewish community and I correct the Black community because I'm a member of both. It's that thing of intersecting identities. I'm not one or the other, I'm all, and all are important to me. So I'm speaking a little shorter because Barbara had such important information and I want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to kind of wrap it up there, but there's more I could say. My story is long and vast, but if you Google me, there's some things to read, and I'm happy to answer some questions now. So I'll end my talk there for now.
Thank you, Bryant. I will say there are some pieces of that story that I'd never heard before, so I'm glad I heard this. I thought I knew your whole story, but clearly I didn't. And I was before we take questions, I was going to just mention that Torah study is always an imperfect process. It's why we've been doing it for thousands of years, and we'll keep on doing it. We build, we build, we build, and we study Torah to become better people. But more important than Torah study is living Torah. So we take what we study and put it into our lives. And we're always like study, an ongoing process of becoming better. And I think that's the idea. We're all doing striving to be the best people we can, and through our study and through our living, we're becoming better all the time. And we thank you for sharing that living Torah with us today. All right, so there are. Let's see if you guys have the ability to use the hand raising function. Is the easiest way to do it. If you go down to reactions on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a little thing that says raise hand. And then we can call people one at a time to raise a hand. Or if you want to type something into the chat, we can filter questions through the chat. And then if you get called on, everybody should be able to unmute themselves to ask their question. Anybody? I think Earl Birkenhead had a hand raised earlier.
And I do like to say, like, this is a situation where I may be the only Jew of color that you get a chance to speak with for a long time, wherever. And don't be afraid of offending me or saying the wrong thing. If a question is asked to me and your intentions are right, then I'll recognize that and I'll answer that accordingly. So if there's something on your mind, please let this be your opportunity.
I guess I'll go ahead and just ask a quick question if I don't see any others at the moment. Barbara and you both mentioned how people walk up and say, how are you Jewish, or are you Jewish, and that kind of thing. Now, as a rabbi, I know I've asked that question of anybody who I don't recognize in the synagogue. And is there a way that manifests differently, or should we just be more cognizant that asking that question can be perceived the wrong way or a different way, depending on who we're speaking to?
Well, personally, for me, I operate a lot on intention. Like, I've spent a lot of military intelligence, so I'm a good judge of character, and then I've spent a lot of time in synagogues all over the States. So I move a lot on intention. So we all like to play the game of Jewish geography. We want to know where your family's from, where in the States you might be from, whose families have crossed with whom, and I don't have a problem with that. What bothers me is when it crosses into the territory of questioning my validity, or questioning my right to be in the Jewish space, or questioning my right to speak up. There are times when the question's asked and they're just curious to know how I'm Jewishly connected to other folks, and that's fun. I love that. But then there's other times where people are asking me the question because they're wanting to maybe make a point that the fact that I'm a Jew by choice, I'm less Jewish, or maybe they're trying to, or maybe it's just an extended period of disbelief. Like, I'm having to explain in different ways that Judaism, and I shouldn't have to do that, because honestly, we've all been taught, well, we should have been taught that a Jew is a Jew is a Jew, and it doesn't matter how they're Jewish, and we shouldn't question how someone came to Judaism, because Judaism is Judaism. So, like I said, for me, it's intention.
It's inappropriate to tell or to make somebody who's converted tell us that they've converted. That's not something we're supposed to ask about.
Exactly.
Barbara,
and I don't mind telling the story sometimes, but it's not the first thing that I should be asked. That should happen over dinner, right? Maybe the third time we've met for a beer. It shouldn't be the first conversation over the oneg.
I just have to say that, again, I am a white Ashkenazi Jew, but from my Black Jewish friends, of which I've gained many happily, they all seem to say the same thing about the first time they're in a synagogue. And it's not, I don't think it's, maybe the rabbi would come over and say, where are you from? Why are you here? But the average person if you're white, would just assume that you belong. Either you are a member of the congregation and they just didn't know you, or that you were a member of another congregation and are just joining us. But the point is, I think it's just so glaringly more common for Black Jews to be asked those questions.
Thank you. Judy Saxman had a hand raised. Oh, okay. Judy said she can't get herself unmuted, but is Brian familiar with the memoir, The Color of Love by Mara Gad?
Yeah, actually, Mara's a friend, and I'm very familiar with that memoir. I got a chance to meet with Mara and speak with her at the last biennial. I think that was maybe 2 or 3 years ago that we've had it now since COVID. And her story is incredible. It's very moving, and it's a book that I recommend. Those of us who care about these issues, I recommend that we all read it.
And Brian, this is a real quick segue. I know Deborah had asked specifically if we could just talk a little bit about what Juvenation was and some of the work that you've done with the union.
Sure. So Juvenation is a fellow. So the Union for Reform Judaism is kind of our flagship in New York City there. And the Juvenation Fellowship is a fellowship they've given every 2 to 3 years. And what it does is it seeks to elevate maybe 12 to 15 different Jews for various programs or for various reasons. The year that I was chosen, they chose 12 Jews across North America, and they were choosing specifically Jews of color. And they chose us because they wanted us to help have conversations, lead conversations, and facilitate different discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion. How can we create programming that's beneficial to Jews of color? What do our Ashkenazi brothers and sisters need to know to make us, to make sure that the space is as comfortable for us as it is for everyone else? And a lot of it just had to do with visibility. A lot of us have been doing a lot of work in this field and others for a long time and just hadn't had the same opportunities and platforms. A lot of Jews grow up in, the camp system, and they have different ways that they've been able to plug into different Jewish community aspects. And a lot of us who are Jews of color, even those of us who are born Jewish, don't have the same opportunities. So what we did in that fellowship was we created programming. We wrote, we created videos and podcasts, and there's lots of media. There's things for different synagogues and teachers to look up on the URJ websites to lead these kind of discussions on your own. Basically, what we did was we created an avenue for people to have the education or seek out the education they needed to start the work in their own spaces.
Thank you. Okay, we had Laszlo and then Christine. So Laszlo.
Okay, now not so much of a question, Brian. I'm talking to you from Hungary, an unusually traumatized region that has not come to terms with its past in any way, in some minor ways. And to me, it's striking, you should say, a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. That to me is so distant and so unreal in terms of what's happening here. I just am struck by the solid identity you have. I want to say I admire that greatly, and I will certainly Google you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. That's incredibly kind. And I will say, I seem cool and collected and rooted in my identity when I do these types of talks. And that's because I've had a lot of practice for a lot of years doing it. But that doesn't mean there's not a lot of soul searching and I don't have the same questions about the same things I had years ago. Sometimes it's taken some time, and also being raised by such a wonderful mixed race and multicultural family. Thank you again.
And cool and collected. By the time you get to the third year of rabbinical school, that'll get knocked out of you.
So I've been told.
Christine Goldberg.
Did it come off yet?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Actually, after Laszlo spoke, it's really not important at all, but I was just going to say that I certainly don't have the color issue, but I have the issue of non-acceptance. Look at my first name, and my maiden name was Link, which is definitely Bavarian. But my mother was Jewish. My grandmother was Jewish. There was some Catholics mixed in, and we were always told that we went from Portugal to the Netherlands to Ireland, which is but then they mix forever. And so you are different. And I don't think that I ever felt totally accepted anywhere until I started going to synagogue in Rio. When I was doing some work there years ago, I don't know, early 90s, and nobody cared. And there were plenty of Black people in the synagogue because they had come from slaves that went to Recife in Brazil, and then they all migrated to Rio because it was more accepting. But I was the only place that nobody's ever questioned me, you know? So I thought that was interesting. But we appreciate you very much, and I think we'll all be rooting for you for your studies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's so important to feel like you're rooted in a part of a community, specifically a spiritual community. So yeah, that's super important. I'm glad that you've experienced that. That it's important to feel accepted.
Are there other questions from for our esteemed guest today? Okay. Barbara or Bryant, do you have any final thoughts to share with us before we depart?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, some of you were talking about the idea of acceptance. Nobody ever believes I'm Jewish. They look at me and they say, you're a shiksa. And I have to tell them I'm 100% Jewish according to all the, genetic testing I've done. And my mother and my grandparents from Ukraine and all of that goes back. They've always been Jewish. They just have blonde hair. But it's really interesting because I am asked that question a lot.
And that brings up another issue is how cavalierly sometimes we throw on words like the one that you said in Yiddish without thinking about the deeper connotations of what that even means, let alone questioning someone's identity. Bryant, did you have
Sure. The last thing I'll say is whenever I speak at a synagogue, the question that I like to ask the congregation at some point is, do you know about the issues that are affecting the Jews of color in your communities or the people of color in your communities? And then I let them sit with that for a second. And I say, if you don't know, why don't you know? And I let them sit with that for a second. And then I say, if you do know, then what are you doing to make the world a better place for all of us? So we didn't have time for me to let you sit in silence and in discomfort today, but it's an exercise of discomfort. Sometimes we need to be made to feel uncomfortable to make a move in the right direction. So I didn't have time to do my exercise, but you should know the issues that are affecting the people of color in your lives, specifically the Jews of color, because we're part of the community, but that extends beyond our own borders and our own community. If you don't know, you should be getting onto it and finding out about them. And then once you do understand, you need to be doing something about it because we've all been told to what? To kun olam, Gimilu chasadim, repair the world and perform acts of loving kindness. It's not a suggestion. It's something we've been told to do.
It's a command and a sacred obligation. And I think we should leave it there. Bryant and Barbara, thank you so much for your wonderful knowledge and experiences. I think if there are any other thoughts or questions, you can email directly Bryant and Barbara, or if you can't get a hold of them, you can filter it through me or Deborah. And Deborah, we were so delighted that you could join us today. And thank you. All right. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Have a great Thanksgiving. If you're traveling, be safe. And hopefully we'll see you back in December. Shalom.